That's the key in discussing this with people, because don't jump to the conclusion somebody has Alzheimer's, because in reality, unless you're a doctor, unless you're a neurologist, unless they've undergone the PET scans, the cerebral spinal fluid taps, the genetic testing, and all the other things that go into making a much more precise diagnosis, I'd watch calling it Alzheimer's until then.
Hey y'all, it's Kosta. Today I'm here with my guest, Kevin Jameson, founder, president, and chief volunteer of Dementia Society of America, a nonprofit working to educate and promote awareness of all types of dementia. Kevin, you started the Dementia Society of America after experiencing the difficulties and isolation that comes with dementia firsthand. How did your personal journey with dementia shape the structure and vision of this organization?
No, I appreciate that, Costa. Thanks for having me today. So, the Dementia Society was kind of born out of a need that I saw after my wife had kind of gone through the trajectory of living with dementia, and the caregiving experience, and she ultimately was in a nursing home and in a dementia care community within the nursing home. And then she entered hospice for the last part of her life. And so I retired when she entered hospice. Even though I'd been caring for her a lot, I did have professional care in the beginning and then moved her to the nursing home. But, the Dementia Society really was born out of this need that I saw, that people didn't know what dementia really was. They didn't understand it. Oftentimes the question would be, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And we still get that question today. But when we started, we knew that people were searching for help and for looking for answers, because they might go to a doctor, they might have a loved one with dementia, and they really had little to go on. They were drinking water from a fire hose and they needed some help. So I felt that there was an opportunity there to educate people, because I'd been in sales and marketing. And so, my expertise was in the kind of education process, getting people to understand this or that. So why not apply that to dementia?
In 2001, as I was reading your bio, and your wife had a terrible car accident. She suffered a traumatic brain injury, which, obviously is the sort of the initial beginnings of her developing a dementia diagnosis. How difficult were those next 8 years before she went into assisted living, and how ill prepared were you? And maybe reflecting back, almost thinking to yourself, why did no one tell me anything? Why did no one give me any guidance?
Yeah. Well, a couple of clarifications. She didn't really move into assisted living. She actually, from her home, moved into a dementia care community within a nursing home, which is a little bit different than assisted living. But the reality is, in the beginning, probably for at least 2 or 3 years after her accident, it was kind of business as usual. We really didn't think about it. And it's only in looking back that I was able to kind of pinpoint a dramatic change in her personality. It wasn't memory loss initially. It was a dramatic change in her personality. And she became very caustic, and just she was typically a bubbly, friendly, beautiful person. But that personality change caused us to have some marital difficulties. And in the process of going through those marital difficulties is when our therapist, we went to a marriage therapist and counselor, and she said, I think there's something going on with Ginny. Doesn't seem like it's a problem with the love between the two of you, but there's something, and I can't put my finger on it. And I really didn't know what that meant, and I don't think the therapist knew what that meant. She just said, recognize something was off. And so it really didn't manifest itself in a way that was meaningful to me in terms of her cognition until we went out to dinner one night, and she asked me how I knew the hostess, because I walked in, I said hello to the hostess. And she goes, how do you know the hostess? I said, well, since the last time we were here, same person. She
Sure.
goes, I've never been here before. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We were just here last month. I can tell you what we had, where we sat. She denied it all. She said, you must have been here with another woman. And that to me was the sign. That was that there was something going on beyond personality change. And so that became the trigger for me to say, we got to get to the bottom of this. I was planning to divorce her. I wanted to leave the house at least. And that all changed that night, because I was like, this is not right. It's not really her. It's something that's going on in her brain.
Right.
And we need to get to the bottom of it. So I just started this kind of long trajectory of pinging her doctor, trying to get the doctor to take it seriously. And that was very difficult, because she was in her 60s, and, most people don't have cognitive challenges, or if they do, they're not caused by an underlying disorder. They might just be stressed out. They might be depressed. I mean, there could be a lot of different things going on. They might have a medication issue. They might have hormone imbalance. They might have a vitamin deficiency. I didn't know what it was, and so that's kind of was the beginning of the process.
Before we get too far into the episode, there are important distinctions to be made between dementia and Alzheimer's. Why do you think so many think of these conditions synonymously?
Well, in some ways they are synonymous, because the reality is that, but they are different. So let's get into it. So dementia is not a disease.
Okay.
That's the number one thing to know. And doctors will call it a disease. The National Institutes of Health does a little bit better job than that. The World Health Organization does a better job than that. Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and a lot of leading organizations in the country and around the world get it. But unfortunately, at a physician level, a primary care physician, or even some neurologists, they will still refer to dementia as a disease. And you see that a lot of times in their web pages. You see it in care communities. They call it a disease.
Right.
A lot of professionals, but it's not, right? It's a syndrome. And what does that mean, and how is that different? A syndrome is a collection of symptoms.
Okay.
Typically without a cure, and typically will be a fatal, cause of death. And Alzheimer's disease, and we can call that a disease. There is a pathological change, and there are pathological markers for it. Causes dementia.
I see.
Or can cause it. And I use the word can because not everybody with Alzheimer's disease in their brain will express dementia. But so vascular disease, many strokes, will cause dementia. Lewy body disease causes dementia. Frontotemporal degeneration causes dementia. CTE, what football players and soccer players can get, can cause dementia. TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, normal pressure hydrocephalus, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, Wernicke-Korsakoff. The list goes on and on and on. And the important distinction is to know that those are all conditions and disorders and diseases that express dementia. And dementia, to define it, is cognitive challenges as a result of those underlying disorders that are so severe that you cannot perform your activities of daily living. That's really the technical definition of a dementia, and also that it's progressive, that it gets worse over time. So when you have something that's an underlying disorder expressing itself in these cognitive challenges that are so severe that you cannot do your activities of daily living, coupled with the fact that it gets worse over time, that's the definition of dementia. So people that have Alzheimer's disease typically will express dementia, but somebody with dementia does not necessarily have Alzheimer's disease. And so
Fascinating.
that's the key in discussing this with people, because don't jump to the conclusion somebody has Alzheimer's, because in reality, unless you're a doctor, unless you're a neurologist, unless they've undergone the PET scans, the cerebral spinal fluid taps, the genetic testing, and all the other things that go into making a much more precise diagnosis, I'd watch calling it Alzheimer's until then.
You know, usually when we look at dementia and the syndrome as you're describing it, and we think of ways to support individuals that suffer from it or have to live with that type of condition, we always look to, you know, kind of the human element, the human caregiver that's going to step in and assist with those activity of daily living, especially as it progresses to the point to where an individual may start forgetting things significantly. And they may, you know, at times even forget how to talk, how to walk, etc. But I want to talk a little bit about a separate component of care, and I want to talk about technology. How does technology aid in providing personalized care options, specifically in improving community engagement, but also communication?
Well, it depends. There are tools out there from a technology standpoint that people have introduced, you know, for folks living with dementia.
Sure.
And by the way, we don't say suffering with. So you made a great correction on your part.
Yes, I've made that mistake before, and
because not everybody is suffering who's living with dementia.
Yes.
That's number one.
Right.
I mean, there's anxiety, there are things that go along with it that are not necessarily good things. But sometimes the person living with dementia is really not suffering. It may be the care partner that's suffering.
Right.
Because they're not able to talk to their loved one as they once did or do things that they once did. So living with dementia is the way we would put it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are beautiful things that can happen. In things that wouldn't have happened if the person hadn't, developed dementia, right? New ways of relating to somebody, you know. A deeper understanding of one's love and commitment to somebody.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to technology, I would say the number one thing is the use of music.
Okay.
So you're wearing headphones today. I'm not, but headphones remind me of the fact that, you know, one of the simplest things we can do for folks that are living with dementia is remember to play music, because even, you know, spoken word may not be understood, but music resides in different parts of the brain. And so even though certain parts of the brain may be affected by the pathology of a dementia, but the totality of the brain may not be. And that's where music resides, right? Because music is a lot of things. Music is sound, it's vibration, it's memories, it's good times, it's bad times. There's emotional content related to music. So I would always say that that's a great way to engage in a community with somebody, either one-on-one or with multiple people, is live music, recorded music, you know, virtual music, you know, over the, whatever form it takes. If it's related to that person's kind of younger age, let's say when they were 17, 18, what were they listening to? So for me, when I get to be 95, you know, I want to be listening to the Bee Gees. I want to be listening to Aerosmith. I want to be listening to the Eagles, you know. But somebody today who's 85 or 90 might be listening to Sinatra, Benny Goodman, or, you know, Tony Bennett, or jazz or gospel.
So as music engages the neural pathways, is it the fact that sometimes, especially when dementia, the syndrome progresses to a certain point, does music allow you, maybe not even verbally, but just in terms of body language and attention and interaction, allow you to communicate with an individual who's living with dementia. Is that sort of the theory behind it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
In fact,
got it.
there is a kind of part of the dementia landscape called aphasia,
Hmm.
where somebody cannot retrieve words or come up with the word for a particular thing, or you call a banana a wrench. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting things because the brain is so complex,
Right.
right? How are these connections made, and why would somebody look at a banana and call it a wrench? But at the end of the day, play a song and sing the verses of that song, they will sing it perfectly.
Absolutely.
Some people who stutter, as an example, can sing well,
Yep.
right? So this is no different when there's a little bit of a mismatch in our brains with regards to word retrieval and so forth. Being lyrical in your communication, singing a question to somebody, "How are you today?" And that may make an impact on the person versus saying, "How are you today?"
Yeah, you're absolutely right. How can technology create more independence and even more safety for those that are living with dementia?
Well, I come from a background of, having sold and marketed electronic sensors
Yeah,
for
I saw that.
35, 35 years. And a big part of that was, door sensors, motion detectors, video cameras, and we're talking about in the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s, this technology just, really blossomed in terms of what you could do and how much it would cost.
Hmm.
Well, today, you can get a camera, on the internet and plug it in, and you're looking at it on your phone, from your vacation in the Bahamas.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you're watching your cat, your dog, but at the end of the day, that type of technology, Zoom technology, this type of teleconferencing that we're doing right now, um, can be really impactful because it still allows a personal interaction
Right.
without you having to physically be there. Other things that people can use from a technology standpoint would be the sensors, knowing when a mom, a dad, a husband, a wife, a loved one gets up and moves or doesn't move, right? If they're not going to the refrigerator, if they're not going to the bathroom, if they're not turning on the water for water, if they are turning on the stove, if they are opening the gun safe, these are all things that technology can help you with because the person who's living with dementia may, not be doing the things that they would normally do to keep themselves satiated, hydrated, and safe. And so, you can add sensors to the home to assist with that. People have introduced apps and any variety of tools for the caregiver as well.
What
So
you're describing is, I believe it's the term is remote supports, and I am curious. Like, you work with people all the time that are not necessarily. I'm sure you work with service providers, but you probably talk to a lot of sort of higher think tanks, people that are looking at a problem and trying to quantify it and say, okay, how do we apply like a macro application to solving this problem? If we stay on the topic of technology and primarily on the topic of remote supports, how do you think that it's going to change in 10 or maybe even 20 years as it relates to the care process and for long-term care overall?
well, I really can only speak to the dementia side of
Absolutely.
that, the long-term care, because if you have a hip replacement and you talk about long-term remote, telemedicine, so to speak, that's different, right? You can even film yourself doing your exercises. You can film yourself. You can have a conversation with the
Mm-hmm.
doctor. You know when to press the buttons, and you know how to make the connections to that telemedicine visit. Potentially, right?
Sure.
If you're cognitively intact. Um, but But as it relates to dementia, I'm going to say the human element is going to be more important than the tech element.
Interesting.
And because we're human, we're not machines. And having a smile, just like you're doing right now, having a smile, having a warm hand to touch your hand, a reassuring voice, that's hard to do remotely. They're getting better with remote robotics, but I don't know how warm that hand will be unless they put a heater in it.
Sure. Do you
So
think they will though in 20 years? I mean, because
I'm gonna say as long as we're human,
yeah,
we're gonna want human interaction in person. That's one of the downsides of many that we just went through with COVID, as an example. The lack of human touch, and the social isolation that occurred from that. But going forward, it taught us a lesson that people do suffer when they can't. It's just like if you don't hold a baby when it comes out of the womb, it doesn't thrive.
right. No, it makes
And
sense.
adult humans are different. So, that I'd say that technology will have a role in certain aspects, of course, but it will never really positively replace the benefit of a human-to-human interaction.
So here's the overarching question. So a little bit of statistics here, okay? If humans are the answer, but less and less humans want to work in this industry, healthcare in general, while the aging population continues to grow as a imbalance in terms of relative to the other population subsets.
I understand.
So if the demand continues to climb, but the supply will not, how will we find
Right.
enough humans to be able to effectively provide the type of care that will meet their needs without devoting a huge, if not a outsized amount of resources to the development of supplementation of the human element?
Yeah, I get it. I think that, Costa, here's the thing. Again, if you look at things that are non-dementia related in terms of medical conditions, right? So non-cognitive related, I think technology will be is today and will continue to grow.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to supplant, some of the rehab work that's being done, because you'll do a self-rehab and you'll monitor it yourself, and you'll have others to speak with about monitoring it, just like you can do an exercise class or yoga class online today.
Right. Using the Peloton, right?
Yeah. But dementia is different.
Okay.
And I will only say that, the available humans to support that community, to support the medical community, will probably have to shift upwards towards supporting those living with dementia, if in fact there's not and multiple silver bullets, right? Because people talk about a cure for dementia. Well, as I mentioned at the outset, it's not a disease. You're not curing dementia. You would attempt to cure the underlying causes of dementia.
Right.
And it's going to be, in essence, like cancer is today. There are multiple therapies out there, right? You can literally cut out cancer. You can radiate cancer. You can provide chemotherapy. You can provide immunotherapy. And you might have to do all of those things with cancers. So you may be finding people in remission, potentially somebody cured of their cancer. And that's the type of thing that may be true 30 years from now with dementia.
Are you pretty optimistic about the drugs that are being approved by Medicare right now to treat Alzheimer's? Is that a positive? Are we moving in the positive direction? Because it seems that Alzheimer's is, people that are living with dementia, the statistics that I've seen is that it's about 7% of the population, which is pretty significant. If you can,
I think when you add up all dementias, it's a much bigger number than Alzheimer's alone, right? And it could be, our guesstimates are it's double the number, right? So you've got a bunch of folks, that are living with a lot of different causes, and they've been underrepresented. They're not underrepresented Right, and they're not underrepresented at the Dementia Society because we're looking out over all causes and the resulting cognitive impairment, which we would call dementia, the severe cognitive impairment. But I will say this, pharmaceuticals in general have to make progress somehow.
Sure. Yeah.
But we're not a pill popping organization, and we don't, it's not something that, oh, the only answer is a drug. In the same way that the only answer for certain cases of diabetes is a drug. You can also change your eating habits.
Yeah.
Right. You can improve your blood sugar just by eating differently as well. I mean, you might have to couple it up with some pharmaceuticals as well. So I think that it's a mixed bag. And I would say that the people that are able to and qualify for some of the new infusion technology that's being introduced and pharmaceuticals that are being introduced, if they can afford it, if they're appropriate for it, and they've been tested so that they're an appropriate candidate, and they want to do it for the benefit of others, that there'll be something to be learned out of it, it's a good thing. But it's not for the masses.
Right. No, and I agree with you 100%. As you're talking, something keeps popping into my mind, and I know we started this conversation about the confusion between Alzheimer's and dementia. And as you look at the Alzheimer's associations and just Alzheimer awareness in general, fun runs, et cetera, it seems like Alzheimer's is it's like leading the charge when it comes to support for cognitive decline and trying to reverse some of the effects or at least treat some of the effects of that decline. This is going to sound like a really silly question, but I just wanted to ask you, since you're the expert, why not change the name of dementia to something else? Because it doesn't sell well in terms of getting people engaged with, oh my gosh, it doesn't make anybody feel, and I know that I'm making it sound like people are fickle, but sometimes they are. It doesn't provide you with the emotional sort of pull because of the term. It's like a variation of demented, and that creates.
Yeah, I would
poor
disagree
feelings.
with you totally.
Please, and
I would disagree with you totally.
let me know.
I mean,
let me know what.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not totally, but here's the thing. Is cancer a good word?
No.
So there are lots of words, and we as humans need a way to express something, right? We got to put a label on things, whether we like it or not. If you can't put a name on it, it's hard to describe it. Or if you can describe it, it's hard to transfer that knowledge to somebody else. If we didn't call a car, what would you call it? An automobile? A horse with an engine? What would you call it? So at the end of the day, right, things do change. Right? When we talk about horsepower, a great example of horsepower, so that was a real thing, right? How many horses did it take to pull a tractor, to pull a cart? So horsepower became, related to engines, and engines became related to mobile devices like automobiles. But I would say no. I mean, Alzheimer's as an example, but Lewy body, frontotemporal, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, all of these are distinct pathologies. Technically today, the DSM-5, which is a manual for a lot of psychiatric conditions and human conditions, medical conditions, calls it major neurocognitive disorder.
Okay.
And that's fine, but that's a mouthful.
Right.
And actually, people almost would rather hear dementia than Alzheimer's.
Interesting.
And so and this is just coming from the thousands of calls that come into us. Somebody will say, my mother didn't have Alzheimer's, she had dementia. Well, I don't know what that means, except to say she was tested and maybe she had vascular disease that caused the dementia, or frontotemporal or Lewy body. So at the end of the day, we impart a negative or a positive on anything we say. If you look at a hot dog from Chicago, you ever seen a Chicago dog?
Yes.
It's got a pickle on it. It's got, celery
Yep.
seed. Somebody can look at it and they go, yuck. I look at that and go,
That's great. Yeah.
So it's our
Yeah.
perspective, right? And we can change our perspectives,
And
right? We're able to do that. We're
and
human.
literally that's what you're trying to do every single day. And I
Yes.
applaud you for it, because educating people on something that we honestly haven't educated them up until maybe a few years ago is quite the task. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about Jenny Gives, named in honor of your incredible wife, Jenny. How is this grant program assisting caregivers and those living with dementia?
Right. So we established Ginny Gives. Well, mainly one thing to know is that Ginny and I met on a dance floor.
Okay.
So we've always been into music and movement, and she was always very athletic. I was a little bit less so. But the one thing we know for sure, Costa, is that there are non-medical therapies, if you want to call them, modalities is another word, that positively impact people living with dementia and their caregiver. So we talked about music, but art, making art, discussing art, viewing art, art in general, just creative expression, making music, singing, listening, discussing, movement. So things that get us to move our bodies, right? Whether it's dance or yoga or Tai Chi or just simple stretching, holding hands, touch. So any sensory stimulation. So all of these things are in the Ginny Gives grants, and any nonprofit care community, so they have to be a 501c3 nonprofit care community, can apply for a Ginny Gives grant. And then we will help them by supporting their program, whether it be art, music, movement, sensory stimulation, and so we're doing that, and they're phenomenal programs to see come to life.
And you guys are all across the United States and internationally.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
How much money have you guys donated to this endeavor?
Well, I can't say Ginny Gives specific because I mean it's a part of what
Sure,
we
of
do,
course.
right? So, but we have raised millions of dollars and we've invested
That's
millions of
amazing.
dollars.
That is amazing.
So, it not just in Ginny Gives, but in education, awareness, research. We fund research into different types of dementia. So we do a lot of different things under the one umbrella.
So we always like to end the show with a call to action. If you could go back to 2001 and give yourself one piece of advice on how to navigate dementia and your journey as a caregiver, what would it be?
Well, I wouldn't go back as far as 2001 maybe because I was not aware. I'd go back to 2002, 2003, 2004 and say, once something became evident that there was a cognitive challenge for me as a caregiver, now granted, when she had her accident, there could have been a lot of things we did differently in 2001, but we didn't know what we didn't know. But I think the issue is that when you do get the inkling of something, then the call to action is take action, do something, get a workup, talk to a professional, push through it. Don't take no for an answer. And write everything down with a time and date stamp when something happens that's unusual for that person or yourself, because that'll create a record of the challenges that you're seeing either in yourself or in somebody else. And you can present that to medical professionals and it will help them kind of drive a diagnosis.